they fail to integrate the surrounding context. What I want to point out is that 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is sandwiched between two chapters on the subject of spiritual gifts. In chapter 12, the Apostle Paul deals with all the various kinds of spiritual gifts. Now, I don't want to assume here anything. I want to be sure that you understand what I'm talking about when I refer to spiritual gifts. Basically, a spiritual gift is an ability which God has given to you as His follower to be used to serve Him and His church. It's basically that. God has given me the gift of teaching and of pastoring. Some of you, God has given you the gift of administration, the gift of leadership. Many of you in this church, God has given you the gift of helps, the gift of service. Some of you have the gift of mercy. You have compassion on the poor and the down and out and the sick and so forth. So these are all various kinds of spiritual gifts. So here you have chapter 12, the various spiritual gifts. Chapter 13, the love chapter. And then chapter 14, Paul deals with specifically two gifts. The gift of prophecy, which actually in context is referring to preaching. And then to the gift of tongues. He compares the two. And the question is, what is this love chapter doing here in the middle of these two chapters on the spiritual gifts? Well, to understand this, you have to look even at the broader context. What was happening in the church at Corinth? Well, the church at Corinth was very gifted. They had all of the gifts of the Holy Spirit in operation. However, there was something apparently very lacking in the congregation of the Corinthian church. And that was what? Love. Yeah. It was love. In other words, here was a church with all the various gifts of the Holy Spirit in operation, but it lacked love. How do we know that? Read 1 Corinthians chapter, the whole book. Because the whole book is basically Paul dealing with problems in the church at Corinth. It begins with division in the church. He deals with Christians taking one another to court. He deals with Christians taking advantage of other Christians during the Lord's Supper. You know, and on and on. So, what is the point then when you look at the context here? Basically, Paul is saying, hey, you have all these spiritual gifts, you're exercising all these spiritual gifts, but you're lacking in something even more important than all of this, and that is love. And that is exactly how he begins the chapter. If you will look at the very ending of chapter 12, you see the very last line there where it says, and now I will show you the most excellent way. You see that? This is what is called an unfortunate chapter break. Those words there should have been included in chapter 13, because you have to understand that the breakdown of the chapters and verses was not inspired, okay, it was added later on. We have an unfortunate break in the chapter here. So really chapter 13 should begin with these words, and now I will show you the most excellent way. In other words, he's been talking about spiritual gifts, okay? But then he says, okay, but I want to talk about something more important than spiritual gifts, the most excellent way. And he addresses the subject of love. And I want you to notice how he begins the love chapter. He integrates it with spiritual gifts. And this is what I call the necessity of love. Chapter 13, verse 1. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, and have not love, so the gift of tongues, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy, and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith that can move mountains, you see all these gifts that he's mentioning, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, which would be the gift of giving and probably the gift of compassion, and surrender my body to the flames, which would be the gift of martyrdom, which I've said many times before, you practice only once, okay? But have not love, I gain nothing. So you see how this is all kind of tied in, related to the subject of spiritual gifts? He said, you can practice all these spiritual gifts, but if you don't have love, you're nothing. In fact, when people exercise spiritual gifts without love for one another, you will run into a host of problems, just like what was happening in the church at Corinth. So in other words, if leaders lead without love, then you're going to have a lot of disgruntled followers. They may follow, but not very willingly. If you have people serving